You're listening to the No Bullshit Vegan Podcast, episode 156. Doctors Alona Pulde and Matthew Lederman join me to discuss their 9 pillars of health and their new book, Wellness to Wonderful.
Welcome to the No Bullshit Vegan Podcast. Myth-busting and evidence-based advice to help you kick butt with your health and fitness on a vegan diet. Here's your host, Karina Inkster.
Hey, welcome to the show. I'm Karina, your go-to no BS vegan fitness and nutrition coach. For new listeners or long-term listeners who haven't checked it out yet, make sure you go to karinainkster.com/resources to access our awesome and free selection of 9 vegan resources, including a portion guide, protein calculator, and a vegan strength training starter kit. So that's at karinainkster.com/resources. My guests today, Doctors Alona Pulde and Matthew Lederman, combined conventional Western medicine, Chinese medicine, lifestyle medicine, nonviolent communication, polyvagal theory, and trauma-informed somatic principles and pain reprocessing to create their groundbreaking health paradigm. They've been successful corporate leaders, starred in the documentary Forks Over Knives, lectured for eCornell, and served as adjunct medical school professors and corporate medical advisors, and are New York Times bestselling authors. Alona and Matt's new book, Wellness to Wonderful, is down-to-earth with relatable guidance and practical advice for a healthy and vibrant life. Doctors Pulde and Lederman bring the book's principles to life in We Heal, a virtual healthcare model built on their book's 9 fundamental pillars of health: self, nutrition, activity, play, sleep, family and friends, work, spirituality, and the natural world. As evidence of the model's efficacy, the Florida-based physicians point to results showing reversal of chronic illnesses like type 2 diabetes and heart disease, weight loss, and increased overall well-being. Their favorite vegan meal is spinach lasagna or going out for Ethiopian, which reminds me of one of my favorite restaurants in Vancouver that I used to go to for Ethiopian meals that I really miss here living on the Sunshine Coast. Hope you enjoy our conversation. Doctors Alona and Matt, thank you so much for coming on the show today and speaking with me. Great to have you here.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you.
Looking forward to our conversation, so let's jump right in. What I like to start with for folks who are in the vegan world, because not all of our guests are vegan, but most of them are. But for those who are, I love to start with your vegan origin story. So how did you come to veganism in the first place? We're going to talk about the amazing work that you do within this field and how you're helping so many folks get onto a plant-based diet. But I'm interested what your own origin stories are, if they're the same, if they're different, if one of you started, what's the deal?
Yeah, so I started being plant-based almost 20 years ago maybe. I was reading a book, and I remember halfway through the book I thought, oh my God, this book's going to tell me to be vegan. And I tried, and I said, they're saying how great you're going to feel. This is pretty amazing. At the time I was on an Atkins diet, thinking that was really healthy. And I said, well, let me try it out and see what they're talking about. And I ate rice and beans for a week, and I thought it was going to be miserable. But I actually felt great. And I said, oh boy, what's going on here? I didn't want to be vegan. So then I tried figuring out like other ways to get out of being vegan, even though I felt great, because I wasn't ready to do it. And I tried to prove that I wouldn't get enough protein. I tried to prove that I wouldn't get enough calcium. And after reading about all that, I couldn't prove that. And then tried to prove that I couldn't get it to taste good. And I got a vegan cookbook, and it took me like 5 hours to make vegan French toast. And then I wound up loving the taste of that. And I said, well, I can't think of any more excuses. I'll do it until I can find a reason not to, and I haven't found one yet, and I've really enjoyed it. And then I realized that not only the health benefits, but benefits in the environment and animals, and just so many reasons to do it, and then I don't have a reason not to, so I'm just continuing on.
Brilliant. How about you, Alona?
I grew up on a Mediterranean diet, so it incorporated a lot of fruits and vegetables, but by no means was vegan, and definitely had a tremendous amount of olive oil and then, some animal products. And I struggled with stomach issues growing up and never quite correlated them to foods that I was eating, maybe to some greasy fast foods and things like that, but not really anything in that Mediterranean clean diet that was recommended. And then in my second year of medical school, my father, who was 55, also on a Mediterranean diet, he passed away from a heart attack, and it was a sudden death, something completely unexpected, personally absolutely devastating, and professionally so as well, because I had a Chinese medical background before, and then I went to medical school. I was in my second year of medical school, and I couldn't wrap my head around what had happened to my dad. He was on the recommended Mediterranean diet. He did have high cholesterol, but was on a statin as was recommended. He, maybe was a tad bit overweight, but nothing significant, and very active in his life. And I couldn't piece together what it was that led him down that path. And then I met Matt, and Matt was already on the nutrition and lifestyle, vegan path. And the more I read and the more I looked into it, the more I realized what the missing piece was. And it really was going to a whole food, plant-based diet.
Got it. I'm sorry to hear about your dad and how early that happened. It sounds like it was a catalyst for a lot of what you're doing now with your patients and your career in general. Still obviously a tough thing to deal with, but thank you for sharing. And I'm looking forward to talking about the book that you have that just came out, or is it coming out still? I can't remember if it's out yet.
Yep, it came out. It's out.
It did came out. Okay, so Wellness to Wonderful. Can you give our listeners like a quick elevator description of what the book is, and then we can go into a little more detail around 9 pillars and kind of the structure of it?
Yeah, so it's about changing the definition of optimum health. So shifting it from, checking boxes around how much you eat, what you eat, how much you've slept, how much exercise you get, to really defining it as getting to a state of life is wonderful. Not that life is always happy, but that you're connected in a way that you can walk around and say, life, when someone says, how are you doing? You say, life is pretty great. I have my ups and downs, but overall, fantastic. And we teach people that that's the benchmark. Instead of, conventional medical systems tend to get you back to your baseline, even if that's mediocre or awful. And we want to get you all the way up to life is wonderful. And we found that there's 9 pillars that can take you there and help you get back there when you sort of get off the path. It's not that you get there and you're done. It's a lifelong journey tending to these pillars. And when you tend to them, you are much more likely to live in this state of life is wonderful, and that's what we're striving for.
Got it. That's a little step ahead, a large step ahead, I should say, of what most folks are trying to do in the medical field of, like you said, getting people back to the baseline, whatever that may be, which is different for a lot of individuals. So you mentioned 9 pillars, and I know some of them are things like nutrition and activity and sleep and things that we might think are fairly clear and obvious. But there's other areas like the natural world and a whole bunch of other ones that are not usually talked about in this context. So what's the deal with the 9 pillars? Why 9? What are they?
Yeah, so Matt and I are often driven by our passion and curiosity, and that's how we got into nutrition and the whole food plant-based diet and the lifestyle recommendations that we made for decades. And it's a regular kind of taking personal inventory of where are we and how do we feel and have we achieved the health that we're desiring, and are we servicing our clients and patients in the way that we would like. And a couple of years ago, we kind of did that whole inventory, and there were things that were missing. We optimized our sleep, we optimized our activity, we optimized our diet, and still we couldn't quite come to that, yes, life is wonderful state. And so we started really taking a look at what's missing. And that's where the 9 pillars arose from, is kind of what is missing and what would make it feel complete. And it really starts with our 9 pillars are an infinity loop, and the center of which lies the self. And really the journey starts with self. It's a connection back to yourself, to, for the first time, take that personal inventory. So many of us are living in this state of survival mode, jumping from thing to thing, checking off boxes because that's what we need to do or should be doing, but never really correlating that to something that we want to be doing. And it could be as simple as I have to exercise, so I need to go to the gym. Whereas you can exercise and get movement in a whole lot of ways that don't involve a gym. I need to eat kale or broccoli because that's what everyone is saying is the healthiest food. No, there are a ton of vegetables out there that are equally satisfying, that could be more satisfying to you and equally healthy that you might actually enjoy and eat more of. So really stepping into self, saying, what is it that resonates with me in these areas and in these pillars? And then how do I create strategies to do those activities or those behaviors? So from the self comes, just like you said, things that we already kind of recognize as things we can optimize on our own, like sleep, nutrition, activity. Play is another one that is really important, and we as adults have really forgotten how to play. But play contributes to health and well-being, and the most significant way is you can't be in a state of fight or flight, in survival mode and anxious while playing. So it really kind of takes down that state that so many of us are living in on a regular basis. Now, once you can optimize that, which we call our internal world, we can relate to our external world in a way that serves us and brings us more, not only health, longevity, but more joy. And so that's our family and friends, because we feel more resourced, right? In that investment in our internal world, we resource ourselves. And so we can show up for our family and friends differently. We can find the meaning and purpose in our work. Spirituality is a really big pillar, recognizing that we are not alone and that there is something much bigger out there that connects us all. And then the natural world, which has huge health benefits and is such an important component to bring us that interconnectedness of, it's us and the environment and the animals and the plants. And so bringing all of those things together and kind of tending to them, having awareness around them as we go through our lives.
And it's important, I think, to note that we talk about nutrition, lifestyle, and connection medicine. Connecting to your external world is so important for healing and for homeostasis, for our body to do what it's meant to do when it's not fighting a threat. It's connecting. That's how we feel safe. That's how we feel secure. And we need those messages of safety for our nervous system, which is constantly scanning the external world, to say, oh, it's okay to digest now. It's okay to focus on rest now. It's okay to reproduce now, right? You need those messages of safety. And if we're in this fight or flight or disconnected way of living, our body can't do those things anymore. And it also can't stop inflammation. Being disconnected, being in a state of fight or flight, high alert, is a pro-inflammatory state. So whether you're eating a really unhealthy diet or having unhealthy habits or being disconnected, they all trigger the same physiological state that's pro-inflammatory, the same adrenaline and cortisol, the same pro-inflammatory cytokines. I think it's important that we get across that connection is not just a nice to have, it's an essential part of healing chronic disease.
That is a really good point. And I think there's a lot of research out there showing things like loneliness sometimes actually have a larger effect on mortality rates than some of the things we think do, like smoking, not exercising, eating foods that aren't giving us good health outcomes. Something like loneliness can have similar, if not more, impact, which is definitely something that should be considered more, I think, in the medical field.
Right, and loneliness can be, there's people that are, let's say they're single or they're disconnected from their family and they're feeling really lonely and they just feel like, oh, if I could just have some more friends or more relationships, I would be better. But there's an even worse type of loneliness where you have those relationships where you're married,
right,
and you still feel alone.
Yes.
Because a lot of people don't know how to really connect at that deep, authentic, we call it compassionate authenticity, where you can really share what's true for you and do it in a way that keeps the connection cared for and nurtured, versus either suppressing what's going on inside of you to maintain attachment or you're sort of sharing what's inside of you and you don't care how it lands. So there's almost a harshness to it. So there's another thing that we've spent incorporating into our healing paradigm, which is nonviolent communication. And it's a really important process and tool for creating the connection that we're talking about, which is more than just going on more dates or going out to dinner with more friends. It's about that deep, authentic connection.
I was going to say one of the things that is also important and sometimes not recognized is in our society today, it really is about burning the candle at both ends. How can we be more productive, more efficient, do more? And we don't associate that to the toll that takes on our health and well-being. And it's really important to consider that in that state of mobilization, in that state of fight or flight, we are creating an inflammatory state in our body that leads us down the road to disease, just like if we're eating an unhealthy diet or living a sedentary lifestyle.
Right. Yep, that's a good point. So when you're working with folks in your programs or, one-on-one type patients, how does this look in practice? I mean, you've got a framework, you have a book that folks can check out. When you're working with someone, do you look at all these pillars at the same time? Do you focus on one and then the next and the next? Like, how does it look when you're helping someone move through these different stages?
Yeah, so we look at the 9 pillars like having 9 beautiful, sometimes rowdy children, right? So it's not like there's one that's more important than the other. It's basically and it's not that we get them all taken care of and everything's going to be great from then on. It's a lifelong process of checking in and tending to them. And if one child is falling down the steps and the other child is needing help with their homework, I might start with the child falling down their steps. It doesn't mean they're more important, it just means they need my attention more right now. So it's this constant, and the joy comes from the work. A lot of people think if I get my 9 pillars in order, then life will be wonderful. And it's almost like saying, well, if I can get all my kids off to college, then life will be wonderful. And it's like, no, it's a whole lifelong journey, right? And I make a joke, that one way to avoid the work of raising children is to adopt 18-year-olds and then send them off to college.
Right.
Right? But then you lose all the joy of raising a child, but it does get you out of the work. Right? So to me, the joy is in the work, and it's all about tending and being in that present moment with them, not getting to some destination.
And the nice thing is that the pillars are interrelated, so giving one attention then ripples into the other ones. So for example, if I am not getting enough sleep and I want to tend to my sleep pillar, but I also want to lose weight and I want to become more active and I want to have more time and I want to show up differently for my family and friends, it all comes together. Getting enough sleep has been shown to reduce our cravings and our calorie intake during the day. We move toward more healthy foods versus more unhealthy choices. So we're more resourced to make those healthy decisions. We are feeling better and more resourced to actually get out and be active. We are, again, and I'm using that term resourcing because it's so important that, again, to contradict that survival state of depletion and exhaustion, it's repletion and resourcing, and it gives us the ability to show up differently. So when we sleep, we can eat better, we're more able to be active, we're willing to play, we have more patience and kindness with our family and friends. All of that. We can be more productive and efficient at work because we're not so tired. So just tending to that one pillar also impacts positively all of these other ones.
Right. That's a really good point. With fitness and nutrition and kind of being in that coaching world, we see this all the time where things like sleep are really underrated, actually. You scroll through Instagram or you're on TikTok or whatever, and you see all these people doing crazy workouts, and you feel like if you're not doing something that's half killing you, you're not working hard enough. And, there's this kind of idea out there about what fitness is supposed to be, right? And nobody ever talks about the basic stuff because it's boring, like sleeping enough, right? Like work-life balance to some degree, all these kind of basic pieces. Nutrition, which is a huge one. It's kind of the foundation of everything. So I think there's a disconnect between what a lot of people are seeing in social media or even regular media, and things that will actually have a measurable impact on their quality of life. And so a lot of the things that you're talking about, the pillars of nutrition and sleep, they're things that are super important, but I think a lot of folks aren't talking about enough. So is that kind of part of what you want to do, is to get this education piece out there that, hey, it's not just about working out all the time and eating plants. Like there's a little more to it than that.
Right, right, because there is health, there is longevity, and there is joy. And it's just like you nailed it when you said they're not memorable experiences that impact in any significant way our quality of life. You know, we're checking the boxes. Yes, we did that. We did that. We did that really hard workout. And maybe we feel pride. And a lot of times it's just like, oh, I was able to do that. I achieved that. And we're focused on achievement and doing. But we don't connect to the being. We don't connect to the joy that something is bringing us.
And a lot of people, when they work out, are feeling more relief from the guilt or judgment that they give themselves when they don't work out. They're so disconnected and sort of like, well, and in general, people are used to looking outside of themselves to know, hey, this is the right direction to go. Like external versus internal motivation. And we really want to cultivate internal motivation, our intrinsic motivation. And when you think that you're supposed to do something, it's not coming from within, it's coming from outside of you. And then if you don't do it, you think you're a bad this, or you're unhealthy. You find some label, right? We knew we were good kids because our parents told us. We knew we were good students because our teachers told us. We knew we were good workers because our bosses told us. And we want to change that so that you're not looking outside, but you're going to check inside. What are your needs? Oh, I have a need for movement. What would bring me joy, right? Oh, today I have a need for rest. Okay, so you rest, right? Most people, when they connect to their inner motivation, they're not going to want to just sit all day and do nothing, right? That's not how they don't thrive. We have a natural need for movement. We have a natural need to contribute in life. We have a natural need to connect to other people, right? That is going to motivate us if we can start connecting to that and stop feeling the oppression from external values guiding us, and we can connect back to our internal values.
That's a good point. That reminds me of an interesting study that was done one time that looked at motivations for finishing what's on your plate. So they asked folks in North America, like, how do you know that you're done eating? And they said, oh, when my friends stop eating, when my plate is empty, when my show ends. And they asked folks in Europe, France specifically, they all said, when I feel satiated, when my stomach tells me that I had enough food. It was all internal, right? So the difference between external and internal actually had a measurable difference in outcomes and like health markers and things. So I think these things are pretty important.
And I love that you point that out, because it's so important, and it's a skill, it's a muscle to develop, to be able to check inside and say, am I full? Or am I just feeling anxiety seeing my plate have food on it and I want to put it in my mouth? Right? What's going on? And taking it, and it takes a little bit of time, but we can rebuild these neural pathways that create these habits that are leading us towards being overweight or obese, and towards having poor health. And your body will direct you if you can sort of step aside and listen versus just be on autopilot and do.
Right. Well, our audience is very fitness and nutrition focused. So can we do a little deep dive into the nutrition piece? So when you're working with someone, or if someone's going through your book and they're focusing on the nutrition pillar, what do they have in store for them?
Well, we like to simplify nutrition. And a lot of people like to make it complicated, and there's like a very small subset of extreme athletes that are burning 1 million calories, an hour, and right. But we're talking about the majority of people are not in that category, right? There's 5 key food groups: fruits, vegetables, whole grains, which includes your starchy vegetables, legumes, and nuts and seeds. Those are 5 food groups, and we tell people to eat as much from those 5 food groups until they're satisfied, or eat dishes that you cook with ingredients that are from within those 5 food groups as much as possible. So either eat those foods directly or make foods using those foods. That's it. Do that until you're satisfied, and then stop eating at that point. And if you're hungry twice, tomorrow, eat 2 meals. If you're hungry 4 times tomorrow, eat 4 meals. If you're hungry earlier, eat earlier. If you're hungry later, eat later. Right? We really try to simplify, and the key is getting as much of your calories from those 5 food groups as possible. And then the other key is learning all of the habits that you've created that you are now eating in a way that is no longer serving you. And then we have to undo those habits, right? So like we talked about, eating until your plate is empty versus eating until you're satisfied. When you're stressed, opening the fridge and going into the fridge to deal with that. If you're lonely, if you're sad, and you immediately put food in your mouth, which makes sense because chewing and swallowing is actually regulating and calming to the nervous system. But you don't need to use food to calm the nervous system. There's other ways to do it without food. So it's not that we just take the food away. It's that we give them other ways to calm and regulate the nervous system. So we try to meet all of your needs, but do it in a way that's as healthy and life-serving as possible.
That's brilliant and very simplified, and not, 18 million steps that someone has to follow. And, there's one right way of doing this, which is, I think, a huge problem in the nutrition world, even in the vegan world. Like, here's one correct way of doing veganism. And if you're not doing it exactly like this, then, you're doing it wrong, kind of thing. But I think there's a lot of room for individualization here, people's own preferences. And, like Alona was saying at the beginning of our conversation, if you're not a kale and broccoli fan, there's lots of other options. It's not like a prescribed diet plan per se, right?
Yeah, that's actually key for success. For long-term success, it has to be palatable. It has to be something that you're enjoying. And if you're not enjoying, you're using willpower, and the willpower will eventually give way to default behaviors. Mm-hmm. So one thing that's really important to remember is that there are a variety of choices in those 5 categories. And there are so many combinations in those 5 categories. And now online and in books, and there's so many recipes available. And a lot of them range from super, super easy to the more complicated, depending on your skill and your culinary skills. And finding the things that you actually enjoy and eating those, and if you don't like a dish, it's not because it's vegan. It's because you happen to not like that dish.
That's a really good point.
And that's where, if you can start connecting to what you like and just connect to what you like and assess that, right? I'll do that. I'll say, hey, you know what? I like this for 2 days, but now I'm not really feeling it anymore, right? Or, I'm really craving lasagna, right? Or, there's this sweet tooth that's really hitting me right now, right? And then I try and I eat something, and I did that meet that need, right? Versus, what am I supposed to eat right now? Like, a lot of people are, what should I eat? What's healthier, right? And to me, it comes back again to those 5 food groups and figuring out what's working for you and what's healthy. If you ask what's healthier, I've been asked, is it a red apple healthier than a green apple? Right? Like, something that I know makes you laugh, but some people, they're trying to figure that out. And to me, it's like, well, it's healthiest is the one that you'll eat the most of. Right? So if you eat like green apples, those are healthier for you. Mm-hmm. Right? And similarly, they'll say, well, what type of salt is healthiest? And I'll say the most expensive one, because you'll use the least amount of it.
Awesome.
Right? So I'm trying to increase the health-promoting foods and decrease the disease-promoting foods. But I'm not saying salt is wrong or salt is bad. There's nothing health-promoting about salt, added sodium, right? But hey, I'm working with people trying to make this, there's no sense telling them sodium is awful and the devil, and then they just hide the sodium from me and don't tell me. Mm-hmm. I'm really trying to stay connected with them and help them meet their needs, not enforce my needs on top of them.
That's a really good point. And I'm going to assume that your approach to activity is the same. I assume. The best workout is the one that you enjoy, A, and thus B, can stick to.
Right, and there's also some information that says, hey, it's good to do something with resistance, it's good to do something with balance and flexibility and cardio, but there's lots of ways to do that. And I'll change it up myself. I'll say, what am I really interested in? And then if I can tell, I'm using a lot of willpower to do this, and I'll sometimes bounce it off Alona, And I'll say, well, is there something else we can do? And I'll keep playing around with the workouts until I can say, oh, I really enjoy that. But I'm very connected internally to be aware of, hey, I'm using willpower, or I'm trying to tell myself, boy, I did a good job, right? If I have that sort of, talk, like, I did a good job, I got an A+ for my workout today, that's external. Versus I feel really good and there's no judgment if I did something different, but I'm working, does that make sense, where we're working together to figure out what is sustainable?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is another example of where the pillars are all connected, because something I feel is missing from the fitness professional world is we forget how important play is when it comes to activity. So I think we could combine those two along with what you've just said about thinking about internal motivations and like continuously reassessing what is working and what you're enjoying and what you're going to stick to, because that may change over time.
Exactly.
So I think these are all examples of how the different pillars are connected, which is super interesting.
Everything will change over time. Like for most people, what I enjoy eating this week is going to be different a month from now. There's some basic dishes that I like, but after a couple of days of eating them, I might not want it again. There's some activity I've been doing for a couple of months, and you know what? I'm getting a little bored with that. So it's really important to check in versus to clamp down and double down and force yourself to do something because you think that's the right workout because somebody told you so.
Yeah, exactly. So along the lines of fitness and nutrition and kind of the audience that we're speaking with, I like that you don't have a big focus on what we call outcomes like weight loss, number on the scale, things that we don't necessarily have direct control over. We're talking about actions that we decide to do, like being active, choosing our foods. These are habits that we have agency over, right? Versus outcomes like whatever the scale happens to say. So at what point, or does body weight factor into this at all? We have what we call a weight neutral coaching practice. So we're working outside the confines of weight loss when it comes to health and fitness and things like this. But I'm curious what your audience or what your patients are coming to you for and what your stance is on BMI, body size, weight loss.
Yeah. The wonderful part of practicing the way that we do is that those are natural outcomes that result from making the changes that we discuss and suggest and work with our clients on. And the difference, though, is that the focus is the need. The need is health. A strategy for achieving health is weight loss. You can achieve weight loss in a variety of ways. People can fast, they restrict, they portion control, they deprive themselves. There's so many ways to get down to weight loss, but how do you want to do it in a way that's sustainable and enjoyable? And if we can connect to our need for health, if we can connect to our need for health-promoting nutrition, the weight loss will follow. And it will follow in this joyful and satisfying way, not in this painful way that ends up often being just a short-term strategy.
Right, because you can't trust the body if you're eating the Western diet, right? So you got to eat the food groups that we talked about: fruits, vegetables, starchy vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts, and seeds, right? If you're not using that as the base of your diet, you can't trust your hunger signals that you can eat until you're satisfied and still be trim. So then people depend on the scale because they have to stop eating before they say they're satisfied in order for the scale to then be the number they want. So the only time you can sort of forget about the scale is if you follow these food groups and you eat until you're satisfied and you learn how to connect to your feelings of satiation, right? And then the scale to me is more of a heads up, right? A little check-in once in a while to be like, wow, I guess I'm getting a little loose. I'm playing a little fast and loose with going out to eat, let's say, right? And I'm letting in a little bit more of the foods that fall outside of those food groups. Because it's not that I'm eating 100% from those food groups, but I'm making that the majority of my diet, and sometimes that balance is a little off. So all that does, it doesn't tell me to restrict more as far as how much I eat. It tells me to change the balance of foods within those 5 food groups and all the other foods that we're faced with day in and day out.
Right. I like that because it's not labeling foods as necessarily good or bad. It's labeling foods that we should be eating more of because they're generally more in line with positive health outcomes.
Correct.
Correct. And those health outcomes are, weight loss is one, but reversing and preventing chronic disease is another. Diseases like diabetes and autoimmune diseases, heart disease, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, so many arthritis and inflammatory conditions, so many of those also benefit from making these changes.
Right. And I think those are probably better markers of health anyways. I mean, just last month, the American Medical Association finally recognized, I mean, it took long enough, that BMI is not accurate and was based on a white population of males and actually doesn't apply and is misleading and really, really inaccurate in a lot of cases for people of color, for example. So finally, after decades, we've been railing against BMI for so long, but there's now an official recognition that that by itself, when you don't take other factors into account, is really not an accurate measure of health. So what you've just mentioned around chronic disease prevention and other types of outcomes that are not body size, I think those are even more important. I mean, there's a lot of research that shows, regardless of body size, if you're a sedentary person, your mortality rate is going to be super high compared to people who are active. And there's a study that came out a while ago, I think it was 2014, something like that, that found body size, like whether you were supposedly normal, overweight, or obese, had zero effect on mortality rate if physical activity levels were controlled for. So focusing on things like being physically fit is actually more useful than looking at weight loss by itself if we're not taking other things into account. So I do like that there are other factors here. I think that's important.
Right. I think that's important because I don't know the specific study that you're referring to comment on that, but I want to do both. I want to say, hey, let's look internally, let's look at our habits in general, but let's not also try and convince ourselves that being overweight can be healthy, right? I want to make sure that
Well, it can.
What?
If you're a physically fit person.
Well, then maybe we have a difference there because I think if you have 30 pounds of extra fat versus maybe you're talking about muscle but if someone has 30 pounds of extra fat on their body, right? Maybe compared to someone that has 30 pounds of extra fat and is active, there's a difference in disease outcome. But I don't think the person with 30 pounds of extra fat should say, oh, my health is fantastic. I don't have to do anything as long as I'm exercising, because I worry that in order to keep 30 pounds of extra fat on the body, they have to eat certain things that might not be as health promoting as some of the other things that you could eat, where it would be hard to keep on 30 pounds of extra fat, for example. So I'm not saying that the people that have the extra fat should judge themselves in any way or should label themselves as healthy or unhealthy, because I think that doesn't do anybody any good. I think they should say, hey, is there a way that I can optimize my health even more than I am right now? So when someone's has 30 pounds of extra fat and they're saying, I should at least move, and maybe it's really hard for me to change my diet right now, then hey, they're doing something that's contributing to their health. But I just want to make sure we're acknowledging both. Like, they may not be ready to change their diet, and there's probably something in their diet that they could change that would even improve their health that much more. Does that make sense?
I think so, yeah. I see what you're saying, because very often, especially in North America, I'm in Canada, body size is correlated with what we're eating and how many calories we're taking in and how many processed foods we're eating, etc. But I do take issue with being trim as the default, as the healthy. I don't think that's accurate. And again, because BMI was measured on only white people, it doesn't apply to a lot of areas of the world. So I think, yes, I understand what you're saying around the correlation between, on a population level, body size and what we're eating, for sure. But we also don't want to make people of a so-called normal weight feel like they're healthy by default, because that's not the case either if they're not active, if they're not eating whole foods, etc. Right? So there's kind of two sides, I would say.
Yes.
And same thing with cholesterol, right? You could have a normal cholesterol normal and still have a high risk of heart attacks.
True.
Right? So to me, it's really about what you're doing for yourself, and are you optimizing all of your pillars? Are you eating the healthiest foods you can? And even if some of those foods could be healthier, but you're not ready to make that change, I think forcing that change on people is no healthier as either, right? Does that make sense? So I think it's really checking in and each person deciding what they can do and what works for them.
Yeah. And I think you're 100% right. You know, a lot of times there are trim people who fool themselves into thinking they're super healthy even though their habits are not. And then that's the person that we hear the story of, oh, but they were a runner every day and they were so trim and thin, and all of a sudden they just, you know, had a heart attack or whatever it was. So absolutely, it's what we're putting into our body, how we're, you know, whether or not we're active. I talk about that a lot with heart disease, right? If you think about your body and your arteries as pipes, and we use pills and procedures like Drano to clear those pipes. But once the pipes are clear, if you're still eating the way you did that blocked them in the first place, they're going to get blocked again, no matter what your weight is. And so it's really important to remember that as far as, you know, where, and that's the difference between focusing on weight and then focusing on health. When we focus on health, we can't eat the foods that we eat, regardless of whether we're overweight or underweight, and call ourselves healthy, but we could still call ourselves trim. Does that make sense?
Right, and we don't care so much about a specific weight number, other than the fact that it makes us investigate and ask some questions. Other than that, to me, the weight number is not that helpful. And even ongoing, the weight number is not that helpful, other than getting you to check in with them. So if someone's really thin, we're going to say, often, I think to your point, they'll say, oh, I'm good, I'm thin. Mm-hmm. And we'll say, I've seen what you eat, and I've looked at everything here, and they're not healthy at all. And you're going to be really shocked, to Alona's point, when you come into the emergency room with a heart attack. And then I've seen people that are 40, 50 pounds overweight, and they're like not healthy either. And then I've seen people that are overweight and they're really healthy, you know, and it's muscle and tone and big bones, and they're eating really clean and their labs look fantastic. So to me, weight is really something just to check in around and give you a little bit of information, but don't base a lot of your health on that alone.
For sure. I think that's a good construct. It's one piece of the puzzle. We always tell our clients, don't weigh yourself unless you're using other measures at the same time. For example, when I started strength training, seriously, I gained 20 pounds. So if all I was looking at the scale, or if all I was looking at was the scale, I'd be like, what the hell's going on here? It's going up. But if you're taking other pieces of info into account, like measurements or your lifts in the gym, your progress physically, photos, how you feel, your blood work, I think together it can form a picture of what's going on. But I do appreciate that it's not the be all end all. That's the good way of looking at it.
Right. We'll have people with cholesterol that will have high HDLs, right? They call it the good cholesterol. And they'll say, I'm healthier because my cholesterol went up. But HDL is like the cleanup crew that cleans out and, you know, brings the cholesterol to the liver and tries to clean out the bad cholesterol and help you out with that. So there's people that either change their diet and they get to a really health-promoting, plant-based diet, and their HDL goes down, and then there'll be doctors say, oh my God, that's terrible because your good cholesterol went down. But to me, the reason HDL is good is because if you're on an unhealthy Western diet and your HDL reactively doesn't go up to try and clean that up, you're at a disadvantage. So a low HDL on an unhealthy diet, you're worse off than if you have a high HDL on an unhealthy diet. But the other option is to have a healthy diet.
Yeah, that's always an option.
Do you see what I'm saying? So that's another example of where you look at a marker in itself in a vacuum, and it can be very misleading.
That's a great point. A marker in a vacuum. That's exactly what weight is usually, unless you're taking other things into account.
Exactly.
So just as we finish up here, can you tell our listeners a little bit about your virtual healthcare model? So it's called We Heal, and I would love to hear about it and how it works.
Yeah, so We Heal is our virtual model, and it's weheal.health. And we offer classes and courses where actually Matt and I are leading a Wellness to Wonderful masterclass that starts in September. For anyone who wants to join, we'd be happy to have you. And it really is going to touch on the pillars and how to implement them into your lives. In addition to classes, we run classes on nutrition and lifestyle and really touch all of the pillars. There are offerings for individual coaching sessions. We have a nutrition and lifestyle coach and a trauma recovery coach, and then individual sessions with me and Matt are available as well. So lots of offerings, lots of free information and readings to enjoy as well. And delicious recipes from our nutrition and lifestyle coach that are
He's also a chef.
Yes, who's also a very talented chef, are worth looking at.
Amazing. Well, as always, we will have show notes where folks can go and link directly to that to check it out. And Drs. Alona and Matt, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was fantastic speaking with you.
Oh, thank you so much for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks again, Matt and Alona, for joining me on the show. Access our show notes at nobullshitvegan.com/156. Thanks so much for tuning in.
Thanks for listening to the No Bullshit Vegan podcast at nobullshitvegan.com.